Alone among the G7, and maybe not in the best way you might think. In a desperate race to get vaccines to Canadians, the government has trumpeted the fact that Canada will be the first G7 country to get 1.9 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine when it's approved from something called COVAX. What is COVAX, you ask? Well, that's the global vaccine sharing initiative that Canada joined, and the primary goal is to get vaccines to low and middle income countries. Canada gave $440 million to that and is actually entitled to use half of that money to get vaccines for domestic use. Meanwhile, Canada is not supporting 99 other low and middle income countries who have asked the World Trade Organization to temporarily waive patents on vaccines so those countries can use generic companies to get vaccines. Now, that's what happened during the AIDS crisis with AIDS medications. Is it ethical for a wealthy G7 country like Canada to draw on the COVAX resource when it has secured so many private contracts, or is Canada within its rights to do that? They paid for it after all. And should patents be made public to allow developing countries to make generic versions? Let's find out. Joining me now to get his view on this is Stephen Lewis. He's the former UN Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS in Africa and the current co-director of the organization AIDS Free World. Mr. Lewis, always good to have you on. Let me start with COVAX. Your reaction to the government's actually a robust defense. They're proud of the fact that they're getting close to 2 million doses from COVAX. They say, hey, that was part of the plan all along. Your thoughts?
When COVAX was created, it was designed to provide vaccines for the low and middle income countries. And it was always understood from the outset that this was not a source of vaccines for the rich and wealthy countries of the world. This was a desperate effort to find enough by way of millions of doses to give some semblance of support to very, very poor countries. And for Canada to be proud of what it's doing, I think is a profound mistake. Now, I realize, Evan, that I'm probably in the minority here because Canadians will be relieved to get vaccines from any source, but this is a profound mistake on Canada's part.
The government keeps arguing, and I've spoken to the International Development Minister, Karina Gould, about it. I've spoken to the Procurement Minister. They say this is how the system works. This is why we signed up. The WHO understood this. We paid for these. Why shouldn't we do it? Even though, by the way, again, no other G7 country's done it. What do you say to them? If you were talking to Karina Gould, the International Development Minister, about it, what would you tell her?
I would tell her that it's wrong, that it isn't up to us to raid COVAX. Yes, she's right in principle. When we announced the contribution Canada was making to COVAX back on September 27th of last year, we said we're giving them $440 million, but $220 million will be used by us for vaccines for Canada. And that should never have been accepted, and it should never have been done. And frankly, Evan, I don't think the international community believed for a moment that Canada would exercise that right, because it's such a violation of the needs of the developing world. Look, just look at it now. We've managed to provide roughly 1 million inoculations in Canada. That is more than the entire continent of Africa put together with 1.4 billion people. It's just wrong morally and practically.
By the way, all of Africa has done less than 250,000 for all of those people. Now, there's another element of this. In the meantime, and this is flying under the radar a bit, that the patents that the big pharmaceutical companies like AstraZeneca and Pfizer and Moderna, there's a call for those patents to be made temporarily suspended. South Africa at the WTO, the World Trade Organization, asked 98 other countries who supported them, saying, let's temporarily suspend the patents for the vaccinations. Canada did not support that. What do you make of that? Why is this so important?
Well, Canada seems determined to undermine its reputation with the low and middle income countries of the world because this alliance of wealthy countries, along with Bill Gates, to frustrate the wishes of South Africa, India, and the other 90-odd countries that joined, that just doesn't make sense. We're in a situation where the suspension of patents is terribly important to provide the right for lower prices and easier availability around the world. Evan, may I say something which has really perplexed me? I just don't get it. We've got the worst public health crisis in 100 years or more. And the response is being run not by governments, not by the United Nations, not by National Institutes of Health, but by drug companies. Drug companies are deciding who lives and who dies, who they will sell the drugs or the vaccines to, and that's just preposterous. Why should the future of humankind be placed in the hands of the pharmaceutical industry when most of the money that's been paid to discover the vaccines came from governments and the public sector? I cannot understand that.
I want our viewers to appreciate that to develop these vaccines, these big drug companies, now some of them have said they're only going to sell the drugs at cost, like AstraZeneca, but billions of dollars of public money from European countries, the taxpayers across the world have gone into that, and yet now there's a fight to buy them. This is why the case to temporarily suspend patents has become so urgent. Why do you think Canada is not, and I've asked the government, they say we're not opposed to it, we just want to study it more. That's why we didn't support the South African motion to temporarily waive the patents.
Well, that's just, I don't want to seem a sort of cynical geriatric, but the fact of the matter is that that's just nonsense, and they know it's nonsense when they disgorge it. They're simply joining other wealthy nations who are concerned about alienating the drug companies. We have to understand the drug companies are the most powerful lobby in the world. They keep on telling us, well, if you take away the patents, even for a brief period of time, then we'll lose the incentive to innovate and to distribute. My God, Pfizer has already announced that it expects to sell $15 billion worth of vaccines next year. In fact, it will be higher than that. The same for the other pharmaceutical companies, but they're determined to make the profits regardless of the costs in human terms.
One thing Canadians listening to you might have a question about, and I want to ask you. Would, for example, suspending patents so more drugs could go to low and middle income countries, would that in any way impede the supply of vaccines for Canadians?
Not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. The Canadian government has so much power compared to other low-income and middle-income countries of the world. So we would continue to purchase on a legitimate basis the vaccines as they come available. After all, Johnson & Johnson has now gone to the United States asking for emergency approval. Novavax is in sight. We already have 3 major pharmaceutical companies. Canada has the resources to be able to get the vaccine. So there would be no diminution of Canada's capacity. But I point out that at its best, COVAX will provide perhaps 20% of the needs of the low-income and middle-income countries of the world by the end of this year. The Economist Intelligence Unit, which does such careful examination of these issues, says that many of the developing countries will not get the vaccines until 2023, even 2024. And we're forgetting, Evan, that if we don't deal with the developing countries, it comes back to haunt us because the virus will spread yet again. So it's got to be a global public health initiative, not just the wealthy nations initiative.
Stephen Lewis, always good to have you on the program. Some urgent questions, health questions and ethical questions facing all of us. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Evan. Bye-bye.